This talks about coming back from an injury or a mistake. Undoubtedly, those of you who've been flying a while have all had these kinds of stories. So I'm encouraging you guys to share after I sort of get started and get cranked through. When you share your story, I'd like you to share the circumstances behind the injury or what the mistake was. What do you think caused the accident? What did you learn from it? How would you prevent it from happening again? And how did you get yourself back to flying again? Okay. So my personal story, March 7th, 2020, I was flying in light lift in Fort Funston. I got dumped out of the lift band primarily because the lift band kept getting smaller. There were other hang gliders in the process. As a result, people were able to take their turn to land. And so you find this a lot at Funston as well, where you're setting up to land and somebody else will sort of jump ahead of you. And that's just kind of how it is, right? That's how things go there. By the time it was time for me to land, it was so light that I was scratching below the cliff. So, okay, all right, get ready to land on the beach. Common problem, right? I picked a wide spot on the beach between two groups of walkers. And we're talking, when I say a wide spot, it was probably 300, 400 yards, right? We're talking like, quarter mile or more, right? So I made an approach over the top of the beach, over the ocean, and turned into the beach. When I turned final, there were two women who were walking ahead of me that were walking away from me when I turned onto final. But then when I looked up the next moment, they're walking towards me instead of away from me, right? So they're continually shortening the distance. So we're talking like 200 yards, right? Which normally isn't a problem, but when you're on a glide path, your eyes tell you you're going to overfly, you're going to hit, or you're going to land short of a target. So my point that doesn't move basically was right on top of them. So if I did nothing, I was basically going to run into them. During that process, I realized, oh, well, I'm going to pull in and I'm going to try and get down, but the ground skim's still going to take me to within a danger zone of them. And at Funston, there's a rule that if you basically get within 25 feet of any person that's not a pilot, then you're going to catch a suspension, right? And I wasn't really thinking about the suspension. What I was thinking about is the safety aspect, right? Even at trim, you're going to be between 20 and 30 miles an hour. If you hit somebody at that speed, you're really going to hurt them, right? So that was in factor. So my alternatives, instead of flying at their position, would be either turn left at the rock wall, which is less than 50 feet away, right? That's certain death. If you run into a rock wall, even at trim, you're probably going to die. So that's not gonna, that wasn't an option. The other one was to turn right and end up in the water. And I actually considered these two options consciously during this process. Landing in the water is also a death sentence. What's likely to happen is the wave action will pull you into the water. You will drown. You will probably drown before you're able to get out of any of your equipment. I know a lot of people are very optimistic about the fact that they're able to, that they think they can get out of their gear before they have any real problems. But I can tell you for a fact, the reality is not that. If you end up in the water, you're definitely in a very, very dangerous situation. The last option was to flare early. So in my case, I was in the ground skim and I'm approaching them, and within 100 feet or so, I realized I'm going to have to flare early. So I let out the bar because your effectiveness the effectiveness of ground effect is the square of the distance to the ground. So if you fly a little bit higher, the ground effect is less effective than it is if you're low. Hoping that was going to make a difference. And then I was hoping to float in and basically flare in front of them. At that moment, I made the mistake, actually, I'll bring it up here, but it's in a later slide. But I made the mistake of looking at one of the two women when I was within probably 100 to 150 feet. And there was one thing that I learned in martial arts. A friend of mine who was heavily into stick and knife fighting told me that if you're ever in a position where you have to shoot or stab somebody or like cause them injury, the best thing to do is not look at their eyes, because the look in their eyes will mess you up. And so I think once this woman figured out that, like, oh crap, like there's a danger that this person could hit me, she kind of opened her mouth and froze, which froze me. And when I looked at the video, it was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to basically totally disrupt my my thought process with regards to my flare. I flared probably earlier than I should have. I recall falling much further than I expected to. And what I did expect was I was expecting to break down tubes. So I expected I was going to blow up my down tubes and the glider was going to be was going to be broken on the beach. What I didn't expect was the fact that I hit my knee on the base bar, this very thin, small radius carbon base bar, which split my knee open. So it was like, it's not unlike if you peeled an orange. So if you dug your fingers into like a tangerine orange and opened it up, and you have the orange underneath and the skin on the outside, that's pretty much what it looked like. What happened after that? Two young men ran up to me immediately. They asked me, "Did you need help?" Well, interesting thing is when I was in the military, one of the things that we always taught people in first aid buddy care was that if a service member is injured, the first thing that they're going to do is tell you, no, I don't need help. They're going to refuse your help right off the bat, right? The natural response is, no, I'm good, I can handle it, right? And the training that we got is to push past that, like, don't accept their refusal of help because they need it and they don't know that they needed it. So I almost said no, and I said, okay, well, the wiser decision here is to accept the help. So he helped me unhook. Um, he helped he helped me to the side of the cliff wall, while the other one ran in a full dead sprint up to the top of the hill. Now, if you know anything about Fort Funston, it's about a 200-foot cliff, and there's a sandy set of stairs that go from the bottom to the top. So running up at a dead run is not a small thing. You have to be in remarkably good shape. So he helped me to the side. Fortunately, Messiah was flying above, and I was like, oh, please, like, I hope she doesn't land here on the beach. Otherwise, we both have a big problem. Fortunately, she was able to top land. She came running down with the medical kit. And the interesting part there was also the training comes in handy, where they tell you, you know, anybody who's injured, even if they're not bleeding a whole lot, there's a risk of shock, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I better keep myself awake and make sure I'm alert, and making sure that all my other facilities are intact. The other guy who ran up the hill was able to grab a few of my hang glider buddies, um, and they ran down the mount, or the cliff, and packed up my glider for me. The wife bandages up the wound, and Rob Johnson is up at the top asking me, like, hey, do we need to call an ambulance? Well, one of the things I've done before is take, well, I used to do military funerals where you carry six people carry a casket weighing between 300 and 500 pounds, and walking at a long distance. So I know that a full-size body on a stretcher, like what it would take to try and get somebody up the hill. I knew it was going to take between 6 and 8 people. It was probably going to take upwards of an hour. And the big problem is the risk to the people that are doing the rescue is extreme, because if you have a foot slip, one of the rescuers is going to get hurt too. So I kind of made an unusual decision. I looked at the top of the hill and I looked at the bottom of the hill, and I remembered, you know, there's multiple stories of people on the outs. You know, I think of the British regiment during the Falkland Islands War, where the Argentinians are trying to take back a set of islands from the British, and the British basically invade. And the British, their helicopters got shot down, so they hiked the British infantry unit that was participating in the mission, hiked 60 miles overnight with all their gear that they were supposed to be flying on helicopters to make the attack at dawn the next morning. So I was like, you know, a 200-foot cliff is not that big of a deal. So with some help from Rob and a couple other people, I managed to hike the cliff on one leg. I paid a very big price for that later, because it turns out I wasn't able to walk on both legs, not just one. Let's see. The aftermath, I had surgery to wash and close up the wound. The leg was immobilized for 2 weeks. I couldn't fly. It was during the heart of the coronavirus pandemic, so we were joking that we were in a hospital full of coughing people and we were probably going to get it. So that was an interesting and fun experience. So what caused the accident? So I write here, not top landing immediately as conditions started to lighten, but actually now that I think about it, it was probably being too optimistic, right? Being optimistic that the conditions were going to get better when the trend line is that the conditions were getting worse. So the right thing to do there would probably have been just to land immediately. Once the decision to land was taken away from me, or top land was taken away from me, the next correct decision would have been, as the conditions started to deteriorate, to pick and choose my own battle, and that is like find a bigger space to land in, right, and decide to land ahead of time. And then the third item is what I talked about before. The problem is that I looked at the person's face, and that actually had an effect on me that I didn't expect, and that it sort of stopped my thought process. Like I said, I looked at the video. It comes out to like probably 7/10 of a second to a full second, but that was enough to unnerve me to the point where it definitely degraded my performance. So I think if I had just focused on what I had to do, I probably could have landed just fine and not been anywhere near them. And in the end, ended up not being anywhere near them. I was definitely target fixated, and I was overthinking the effect I was going to have on these two bystanders. Okay, so the gory details. It turned out it was a fairly major laceration, basically from one end of the kneecap to the other end of the kneecap horizontally. They pressure washed it literally with a pressure washer, and sewed it all up. So I think the first 3 days I was pretty drugged up on Motrin. I stayed away from the narcotics. Couldn't walk very much. The third day I went to Costco and did some shopping with that leg brace that you see in the center photo. So what did I learn from it? Pick the time and place of the battle, or it picks you. That's a concept from Sun Tzu, right? The army that hastens to the battlefield arrives tired. It's better that you pick the time and place of the battle. So what does that mean? In a practical sense, what that is that it's better for you to choose your circumstances than have the circumstances push a situation on you. As soon as I started to drop below the cliff and it looked like things weren't going to get any better, probably the best thing to do would be continue south where there are a lot fewer people and land ahead of time. I've since landed on the beach since the incident, and that's the option that I chose, and it was easy as pie. It was no problem at all. External factors can degrade your performance and concentration in the moment. That's what I was talking about, like looking in somebody's face and having that reaction degrade your mental performance. Obviously, it's kind of a tall order for most people. If you find yourself in that situation, you need to focus on what you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to go badly. Third item, never forget your line of retreat. There's a World War I ace named Oswald Boelcke who came up with a list of rules for his pilots called the Dicta Boelcke. But the number one rule in that is never forget your line of retreat. So whenever I fly, I have a virtual red arrow in my mind that points the direction of where safety is. And if I ever run into the situation where that red arrow disappears, that's what makes me nervous, right? Where I don't know where to go for safety. So in this case, if I were running the situation again, I'm starting to sink out, everybody start scratching on the cliff, there's not a lot of space. The right thing to do would be go where the likelihood of encountering people is the lowest. Flying. It means that you have to take the hit over pushing the risk on uninvolved parties. So you choose to fly, you choose to take the risk. If it's between you and somebody who hasn't taken that on as pilot and in command, sometimes you're the one who has to risk injury and death rather than you involve them, right? We've had a number of airplane accidents recently where people have crashed on roads and stuff like that and injured and killed people that had nothing to do with the incident. And I don't consider that really a morally acceptable choice, right? You're there, you choose to fly. If it comes down to you're having to take the hit, then you take the hit. Accept help if you need it. Don't have the knee-jerk reaction that I and most other people who've had my background have, and that is to say, no, I'm good. Well, if you do need it, you need to assess whether you actually need it and accept it if it's offered. So Did those two guys really do me a lot of material good? I would say probably not, because everybody saw me hit the beach and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is like it definitely was a big moral boost, because if nobody had come to my aid, I probably would have had to unhook and drag myself up on the beach by myself, which I mean I'm capable of doing, but just having that little bit of extra help made a big difference, at least in the morale of the moment. So I had a couple of people, actually 3 or 4 people, come down, help pack up my glider, and help me walk up the steps. I had other people coordinating to try and get other types of help. So getting, potentially calling an ambulance or and the like. I even had a friend Rob Johnson drove me to the hospital on top of pushing me up the last 100 yards of the hill. So you being a good wingman to other people means that there's a high likelihood that other people will be a wingman to you should you require it. Okay, so the other one is if you capture video of a traumatic incident, do not, and I have to put this in bold letters, do not watch it over and over again, right? If it wasn't traumatizing, experiencing it, watching it over and over again certainly will traumatize you. It is good to look at it to make sure that you learn the lessons that you need to learn from it, and then you take it and you kind of crumple it up and throw it over your shoulder. What would I do to prevent it from happening again? So I would definitely be more conservative towards landing in marginal conditions. I have a tendency to pick conditions where I'm not going to end up on the beach. If I am going to risk landing on the beach, I'm going to pick a day where there's not a lot of foot traffic on the beach. Wear knee pads. So if I'd just been wearing a thin set of knee pads, this would have been just a minor problem of breaking down tubes and having to hike a broken glider off the beach. Now, I wouldn't say that's a minor problem, but it certainly is a big alternative from getting hurt. Have more landing options when conditions are light, right? So have more areas picked out, and don't find myself in a position where I'm forced to pick between two groups of people that act unpredictably. If you're landing near people, don't look them in the eye. That is a significant distraction. Obviously, you want to make sure that you don't contact them or get too close to them, but don't look them in the face. The fact that they give you a reaction will certainly have an emotional and psychological impact on you. Don't look them in the eye. How did I get myself back to flying again? So other people, especially people in the flying community and in the military, people suffer huge setbacks and still are able to come back from them. Hearing that story is a fairly common thing. It's not a uncommon thing to have people that suffer injuries or make mistakes and the like. Actually, I would say that's the norm. So in my mind, I did briefly consider quitting while I was lying on the beach, but then I gradually threw that away from my mind. Like, that's not happening. I'm not quitting. So I knew other people had suffered setbacks and was able to come back from. Physically, literally walk, jog, run. So the wound healed up. I was able to walk slowly, hobble around for a while. Then I was, within about 3 weeks, I was jogging, and within a month and a half, I was actually open and running. So people don't get less scared, they get braver. So you run into a situation, rather than letting it traumatize you to the point where you're not able to function again, you have to increase your courage to match the fear that you feel. It's not that people encounter situations like this and they get less scared as a result of the exposure. They sort of rise to the occasion. This is one of the few cases where you actually are pushing yourself and you rise to the occasion. We say in the military that you don't you don't rise to the occasion, you always fall to the lowest level of training. But in this case, this is true. It's like you have to push yourself to that position. You have to make yourself braver to overcome that, right? It's they're not this, being less scared and being braver are not the same things. The concept of extreme ownership, it's by the Navy SEAL Jocko Willenick, who I've been reading a lot of. And that is that you own everything in your sphere. You're responsible for everything. And this goes along with the idea of pilot in command, right? Pilot in command, if you actually read the language in the FAA regs, it says pilot in command is responsible for all aspects of the flight. At the end of the day, there's no one to blame for an accident or an incident other than yourself. Well, maybe not to blame. The right way to put it is this, in my view: it may not be your fault, but it certainly is your responsibility. And that's what extreme ownership is all about. It's like you own every part of the process. Even if there are other people involved and they were a factor, you can't blame them. You were at fault and you were responsible. The important part after an incident or an injury, the first flight not be terribly challenging. Looking back on it, I probably didn't follow my own advice there because I flew a brand new site with a brand new LZ. But it was relatively familiar to me. It wasn't particularly technical in the sense of launching and landing. It was certainly well within my capabilities before, certainly well within my capabilities after. I think if anybody ever runs into that situation, that first flight back is really important, and you have to set yourself up for success. So you had a potentially damaging or potential damage to your confidence. And so it's very important that that next flight help you build up your confidence again. The injury happened March 7th, 2020. My first flight was May 5th, 2020. So it was a little less than 2 months. I had a real good doctor named Dr. Watson, literally Dr. Watson. And she's one of those ladies that you just don't mess with. And she told me what was going to happen, and it happened, and it healed up. I didn't have any kind of infection or any kind of side effect. Didn't suffer any ligament injury. So like overall, I consider myself extremely lucky because I could have gone down much, much worse. But now I take a few extra steps, and I make sure that I have the appropriate PPE. So I wear knee pads and, if necessary, other types of equipment to make sure that I don't run into that situation again. Okay, that's the end of my part of the presentation. Is anybody willing to share theirs, or does anybody have any questions about what we just talked about?
I'm happy to talk through the time that I landed in the training bowl.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got
Go for it.
questions about yours. I'd like to hear other people's questions about yours too, but
okay. Do you want to do questions, or do you want to go forward with yours?
No, I want to ask you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just from a just, I don't know, from what you could have done differently standpoint, like I definitely agree with you. Everything I know about landing in the water is then you die. If you get a few inches of water covering the area of the sail, you have a land cruiser sitting on top of you in weight, is the way I heard it said. Is hitting the cliff dead? Like, you're faster than me, but you can flare to the point where the base bar is going to hit the cliff first, right?
I mean, like, look, you're wearing a helmet that's only a little bit better than a bicycle helmet, and you're hitting that cliff potentially at 20 miles an hour. If the wind on the beach is strong enough, you're going to be hitting it a little bit more than 20 miles an hour. I mean, like, is that a risk you really want to take? I mean, like you're talking about hard packed sand or rock. I mean, that's not going to end well.
Yeah, and I can say I crashed. Yeah, and I can say from experience, I crashed training for a mountain bike endurance race. I went down at like 30 miles an hour, and I hit the ground. I hit the ground hard enough where I bounced back up on my legs, but I was hunched over, hit a pole with my head, and it spun me around and knocked me on my ass. It took me over 2 years to heal from that. And I had a helmet on. My helmet didn't have a scratch. So by the time I hit the pole, I probably reduced it down to about 20 miles an hour or less. And just that smack knocked me out. It was pretty intense, the injury that I sustained. And I mean, I finished the ride. I ended up finishing, I did like 75 miles. I hit the ground so hard that I cracked the molar in the back of my mouth because I hit my chin.
So let me ask you about that real quick. Since you're a medical background, right? So did you have medical training at that point?
Yeah.
So like when you struck your head, did it enter your mind that you could run into a situation? Well, you've heard of talk and die. Have you ever had that? Like, did that cross your mind?
Yeah, what was funny was I was by myself. Because usually I always had a hard time trying to find somebody to ride like that kind of distance and elevation. And just give you an idea, I was training for a mountain bike century ride in single speed class. So I was looking at doing an event, a challenge race that was a 110-mile course, mostly dirt, with about 15,000 foot of elevation gain. So the training ride that I was doing was a 75-mile route with about 10K of climbing. So I was packed to ride all day, and so I was by myself because nobody else wanted to do it. And there was nobody else around. And I went down, and luckily I got back up, and I stopped. I checked myself. I did a full assessment. Everything checked out. Everything was good. I waited for like 20 minutes. I had a snack. And I wasn't far from houses. Like, I mean, I could have, I was able to walk and of course ride, and I could have
Yeah.
called for help, but I was like, it was that I don't think it's all that bad. Like, I'm pretty
Yeah.
good, I dusted off, and then I was riding, and my wrist kind of hurt, my jaw kind of hurt, so I knew I was banged up a little bit. I knew I was going to be sore the next day. But just to give you an idea, it was classic textbook. It was a concussion. It took
Yep.
3 days for the symptoms to kick in.
Yep.
I was fine. I took the next day off. Next day I took a rest. I told my wife about what happened. Everything was good. 3 days later, walking out of the garage, it was like slapped me in the face. I was like in a haze. I was kind of confused.
Yeah.
Long story short, those symptoms went away in 2 weeks. About 4 months later, I ended up in the doctor's office, full-blown panic attack. Had no idea what was going on. I developed post-concussion syndrome.
Yeah.
Which was a nightmare. And that took me a long time. So, but this could happen in hang gliding, very easy. And a lot of what I went through, I've actually spoken to a lot of people like in different sports about what I went through. And when I told them the symptoms I had at least a handful of friends that thought they were going through midlife crisis. Turned out they had post-concussion syndrome.
Yeah.
I had friends that ski, snowboard, and same thing. Like, a few months ago I hit my head, and same thing. Like,
Yeah,
I had panic attacks.
It's far more common than people give it credit for. And of course, like, I have, well, like I was in the military during the height of the Iraq War. So like TBI was the silent injury. Yep. So to your point, Bailey, I did consider briefly, because it was like, okay, well, it's uphill, right? But the thing is like, it's probably better to dig a wingtip and cartwheel in than risk hitting that brick wall or the rock wall head on. And then of course, the water is no option. It's just you're going to drown. Now, even if you have a plan for it, like, which I do, like I call it the hook knife kata. Right, like, and what you do in martial arts, so you have a forearm that you execute. Well, I have a toe kata for hook knife, and I have a water landing kata for hook knife. But the question is like, in the moment, how confident are you that you can pull it off, especially since you haven't actually done it before? So, like, look, in real terms, I'm still happy with the decision that I made. I'm satisfied with the decision that I made, given the circumstances. I still would have rather have had it end up that way than me. And I've had a close call where I almost clipped somebody. I would rather have that than take a leading edge and run it into somebody's head at 25 miles an hour. Right.
Yeah. And also too, like,
a devastating, like, we're not even talking about like the fiduciary responsibility of the insurance. I mean, like, you do that knowingly, and you severely injure them or kill them, like, even if you stay out of prison, like, is that something you live with? And I didn't consider that a moral choice at that moment. And believe it or not, and I've talked to other people who've been in these sorts of situations, you will consider all of those options in the short amount of time that you have. You will think about all of those things in that moment, right? Because I did. So I have the video to prove it. I probably made all of those decisions in the space of 3 seconds, and I considered all those choices. So I don't like the fact that I got hurt. I don't like the fact that I depended on other people, but I'm still happy with the choice, because I would have rather done that than the potential alternative.
Yeah, and I think it's smart because, also too, I ride motorcycles. I used to race motocross, and I went through some motorcycle safety training. And, one thing we're taught, and it can be applied here, is, when you're coming to an accident, you might have a choice, and you're looking at 2 options where you could, be further from the ground and closer to the ground. You want to be closer to the ground. So, by dipping a wingtip in and cartwheeling, now you're going to give yourself more altitude. You're going to increase your injuries. So, if you're fairly close to the ground, you're like, okay, water, death, cliff, major injury, I'm not going to kill the person. So yeah, I mean, and because if you really look at it, I mean, your injuries, like if you were wearing knee pads, really it was from the base tube.
Yeah, that's right. It would have been totally minor had it not been for the
yeah,
fact
and
that
if you would have missed that base tube, you would have been like, oh, dude, down.
Or even
tube.
like,
So,
to be honest with you, probably even a set of long pants would have made a difference.
Yeah. So really, I mean, that was from the base tube, which, those kind of things happen. But yeah, I'd agree. I mean, that was definitely a good choice because, we're always taught, like in a motorcycle, if a car jumps out in front of you, lay the bike down. You'd rather get hit with the road and become a cheese grater and get road rash than impact that car and get tossed over.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it was the glider versus like the meat of another human being, and like that's not acceptable. Bailey, does that address your point?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Bailey, it's time for your story. So, if you would follow the format that I laid out for you.
Oh, could you pull up the format that you laid out for me? I wrote down one of these things.
So what I'll do is I'll just talk you through it. Hang on. Cool.
It's also a good idea, in this conversation is to, like, even being a bystander, learning how to handle these things. I'm always caught, like, after an accident and jumping in, and I try to, even though I have medical training, I try to not use to do everything. I just try to maintain and get the proper help, because even though I'm a registered nurse, but it's like I want paramedics there, I want their gear. So lots of times I'm always nope, don't take his helmet off.
Well, Tim,
get him to sit.
So this is why we put that initiative forward at Fort Funston to use club funds to send members to first aid training. So if you're going to do anything and you want to make good suggestions to the club meetings down there, that's one thing to do. Okay, Bailey. So what was the circumstances behind your injury or mistake?
Sure. Once upon a time, you were there. I bought a Sport 2 and wanted to try it out, and met up with the guy at Fort Funston. This was the first time I'd ever flown a double surface, and we set it up, and it looked like good, and he test flew it, and so I saw that the glider flew well. At this point, I could have packed it up and gone to Ed Levin and done the proper training progression, but instead I decided to go out to the cliff and kite it and feel how it controlled. I knew it was going to be more difficult to roll than I was used to, but standing out at the cliff, like, I was pleased with the amount of control that I had with it. Through all of this, picture me at like 20 hours, 25 or something, so intermediate syndrome, just playing in the background as a track. I, in like happy medium wind straight in, felt like I had good control of the glider, so I decided after half an hour of playing around with it to launch and go back and forth across the cliff. There wasn't a ton of air traffic. It flew well. I was able to turn, and the turns were wider than I was used to because it's faster than I was used to, but it was happy and under control. I decided to see if I could turn more abruptly and stay in the lift band. So, in Takeo's words, I ended up doing wingovers on my first flight on this thing. Landed well, took off with it again after chatting with the guy and making sure he didn't have anywhere to go. That's where my head was. Landed well again, crosswind after coming in from the north through the bush rotor, but fast enough that it didn't disrupt my flight at all. I got a comment from somebody like, oh, that's usually where we would see it hit you, but no. That went fine. Took off again for a third flight on this. I put like 2 hours on this the first day I had it. Flew around with half VG on, and that went great and was even faster and like exciting. And I decided at that point to go and check out Westlake. I'd never been. Why not? This seems like a good day for it, apparently. And so I flew over to Westlake and made it there fine. The wind was good. Played back and forth over there, and the lift band is huge, so I got to explore more of the glider's like range and was very happy, and then decided to make it back, and conditions had ever so slightly lightened. And I had never seen anyone come back from Westlake and paid enough attention to know which line to choose. So I tried taking the one over the cliffs on the beach. If I had gone up near the golf course, I would have made it back fine. So after flying this wing that I've never flown before for 2 hours, and being a little like fixated on, okay, I make it back to the thing and landing, and watching myself get lower and lower on the cliff, I decide to kick my legs out in case I need to make a beach landing, and my harness decides to lock up the zipper at this point. And I get distracted for a couple of seconds trying to figure out the zipper, and I'm like, fuck it. And pay more attention to where I'm gliding, and I can either go and land on my stomach on the beach, or I can try and scratch and hopefully get up and have more time to fix it. I go for the second option, am scratching on what I think is a perfectly like ridge soarable cliff, and later walking this is like that section of the cliff as I'm trying to ridge soar this when the cliff up here is taking all of the wind. That didn't work, and I suddenly find myself like hitting a bunch of sink, realizing that I don't have time to turn out and hit the beach. I've passed that point. So I just get to pick where in here I'm going to be landing. Pull in for speed and maneuverability, like aim for the softest bit of trail and flare with my legs still locked in the harness. And set down and hit the down tubes hard enough that I'm kind of surprised, but no bend. I'm unhurt, the glider's unhurt. I managed not to do any damage to it. But that was all entirely luck. I wasn't picking this spot to land more than about 2 seconds in advance. Get it packed up. The guy was very kind about it, helped me pack it up. I have a picture of where I ended up landing, and Diver Dave got a nice shot of me from overhead. And posted this with...
Yeah, I was there that day too.
Yeah. Bailey Adams practicing some top landings in the training bowl, and I get to reply with, it's only practice if it's intentional.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a hell of a spot landing, Bailey.
Yeah, no, it worked. I remember thinking as I'm sinking out, like I realized that I'm crashing, and my brain goes, wait, this doesn't happen to me. And reading up a bunch of like the psychology of accidents, like that's a very common response, is just like, I'm rejecting that this isn't supposed to happen to me. I'm a good pilot. And the prioritizing trying to stay up and have time to figure out in my, how to get my feet out of my harness rather than just skidding across the sand for a landing. I knew I could have done that. Like, I hadn't practiced landing on my stomach with my legs locked in the harness explicitly, but I'd had a couple of rolling landings. I had no wheels on at this point, but I thought that I could get that done. But I didn't go and take that safer option. I wanted to try and get it like the optimal way, and so I was chasing that worse outcome.
So in essence, you painted yourself into a corner.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And it is by luck that I didn't snag a wingtip on a tree, spin into the cliff, and have all of the nice things that you described, but at a slightly slower speed, happen to me.
So what do you think caused the accident? And I think you're already crawling into that.
Oh man, just taking on way too many new things all at once in a day. Flying fatigued. Like 2 hours is not the longest that I had done at that point, but 2 hours in on a new wing at a section of the site I'd never flown before. That's setting myself up for this. And so I'm happy to have come out of it with no injury, but that's luck. Like, I like the concept of drawing from the luck bucket and putting in experience. Like, this took a giant chunk out.
Tim and Max, this is what's commonly known as the throes of intermediate syndrome. Okay. Okay. What did you learn from it?
Mostly to come at the approach to my flying and my decision making with a lot more conservative perspective. Like, all through the school, like Robert and Arturo both seemed hyper conservative to me, as opposed to like I wanted to go higher and progress up the hill faster and take on more. And like, they kept me at a place where I was always very skilled for what I was trying to do, like you're supposed to as an instructor. So I had not hit, except for a couple times, the point where I felt like the edge of being out of control. High wind with you being on one. And so I wasn't coming at this from a just mindset of trying to stay in the green area of risk. Like, there's no reason for me to try and stack all of these things into one day. I would have been just as happy to come back next week after going to Ed 11 for a day and like then be exploring and doing the more aggressive maneuvers and just keep it to that first flight here, if I wanted to fly here at all that day. Going over to Westlake without talking through like how to get there with anybody, without somebody flying with me and showing me how to get there and back safely. Like there's no reason to do that makes any amount of sense. And that like, I want to do this sport for 30, 40 years. I put myself in a position where there was a decent chance, not more than 50%, but more than 5 of me not being able to do the sport at all anymore.
I don't know if I ever had the discussion with you when you were on the hill, but you remember what I told you what the goal of every day's flying is? Go home at the end. And you know, obviously in my case, I've failed that mission at least once. So okay.
Yeah, whenever you took me to a new site, it was like, your only goal today is land safely.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care about the rest of your flight. The landing you're going to nail.
Okay. What would you do to prevent it from happening again?
I read a bunch on safety and like how to change the culture of your corporation, your organization, to have a more safety mindset approach. What people put in their checklists and like actually adhere to checklisted approaches a lot more. Talking with people in the flying community about the choices they're making and why. It's something that I still struggle with, honestly, but I think I'm doing a bit better than I was that day. Just trying to, in every flight, in every time that I'm thinking about this, keep in mind that intermediate syndrome is not something that happens to Joey Villaflor, the guy that like I met at McClure on like, let's buzz the launch and land backwards in the LZ. I love the guy. He's very skilled. But like, it's not just him. It's me. It's people that are more conservative than me are still affected by this thing. I need to be managing it. Otherwise, I get hit with it.
Yeah. It's good. Oh, I got to ask, was Hat Creek before or after this?
Before.
Before that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. For those of you who don't know, Bailey's call sign is greedy. That should tell you something. Okay. How did you get back? How did you get yourself back to flying again?
I don't recall. I could pull up the spreadsheet, but I don't think that I stayed away from flying, but touching the double surface again, especially then going into COVID, like I sat on it for more than half a year, and picking it up again, like baby steps, taking it out to Ed 11, walking around or like running with it on the flats before trying it up the training hill and things like that. Other issues with it mechanically came into that, but yeah, coming back to picking on a new thing, like I tried as much as possible to write down and agree with myself like limits that I would set ahead of time. Like,
so you actually have written personal limits?
Yeah.
Wow.
Somewhere.
Okay.
I need to actually have them on flashcards to read before launch, but yeah, I'll do the I am safe checklist, everything, and like I'll allow myself a point of fatigue and no more. And I don't get that with like, oh, my medication changed in the last couple of weeks. When trying out new equipment, wing, harness, anything that's distracting in front of my hands, I get 1. So I can't do it in a new site. I can't do a new harness and new wing at the same time. Like, I know that I could probably get away with it, but God, why? Yeah. Like, just do 2 flights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it looks like I didn't realize to the degree that that incident had cleaned up your flying, but it looks like it has. So that's really, really, really good. Like the likelihood of you repeating that is pretty much 0 at this point, right? I remember because I remember when you're packing up. I remember the look on your face. It was different. Like you definitely changed. Like something had changed. So and it was to the better, right? So
I'm glad I didn't need to see an injury to get that look, and like recognizing it in. That's why Robert and Arturo are so conservative. Like they've seen people hurt. It's coming from that perspective.
Yeah, it's I gotta tell you, especially with new people, it's the grist mill. Very rarely is it like a very serious injury, but like, man, you only got to see one broken arm, or like have to see like somebody turn towards the hill, or Yeah, it's not pleasant. You got to do what you can to reduce that. Does anybody have any questions for Bailey?
I guess I'd be interested in seeing that safety checklist if you'd be open to sharing it.
Oh, you're talking about I'm safe? Okay. Here.
That one's a standard one for flight.
Yeah,
Is
for-
what things
for-
might be affecting me for my safety, like personal safety,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up for you.
yes.
Okay.
That's better than me saying them all.
Here, I'll pull it up for you right now. Okay. So we'll do this. Share screen.
But yeah, in addition to that,
And just kind of in general, as a newer pilot, you're constant. I feel like I'm constantly in the mode of trying to understand my own limits. And so it's kind of, it feels less of a question of if, but more of a question of like, when I do get into an accident, how bad it's going to be, because the very nature of the sport is that you are pushing the limits of what what a human should be engaged in, arguably. And that's what makes it so amazing. And it is a sport that where you are constantly mediating risk. So I don't know, I guess in general, any tips for kind of just kind of really being honest with yourself about like how much risk you are taking on, whether it's with a new wing or a new site. I think this safe checklist is probably good, but just kind of in general, there's like, it's a very a subtle skill. It's a very soft skill. It seems like that is like one of the most, second to technique, like probably one of the most important things you can develop as a pilot.
Yeah, so I would actually argue with you that it's inevitable. It's not. We've got the safety management talk that we did last year with Tom Lowe, who's flown like 47 years without even a scratch, and he was an aerobatic champion. So like, I mean that should tell you something. But he's also exercised a high level of skill. I mean, he's just a remarkable like pilot. But so for I'm safe, it's basically right here. It's all one. It's an acronym, right? So illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue,
Okay.
and eating. I don't know if that was the normal last E one. Oh, E can also be emotion as well. So emotion / eating. So basically, like, are you sick? Are you taking medications that could affect your flight? Are you under like mental stress, right? Obviously, alcohol. The Part 91 rule is 8 hours, right? And it's actually closer to 12. It's a factored thing. So if you wake up and you have a hangover, you ain't flying. That's just the way it is. Okay. I happen to know of a hang glider pilot that is known to or has been seen smoking ganja before he flies. Obviously, that guy's not going to be flying much longer if that turns out to be the case, especially if I happen to witness it. That's unacceptable. Those kinds of things. Fatigue is a big one. So Bailey, you talked about fatigue. Fatigue is not just the lack of sleep, although that's the one that bites people the worst, right? Like some people will drive like all night to get to a flying site and decide that they want to fly. Well, I mean, you realize with like if you're down 12 hours on sleep, you're operating at something like a 40% deficit of your cognitive abilities. It's about the same as being drunk, right? So well rested is a really important thing. Eating, like, I mean, I've got an external fuel tank, so like I can get by without eating too much, and I won't suffer that much in the way of physical consequences, right? At least in the long term. But like, especially you thin dudes, you really got to watch out. And you know this, Tim, right? Like you try and exercise without eating breakfast, it ain't gonna go well, right?
Yeah, and I was going to mention because, like, my little experience wasn't an accident, but it was with fatigue. And
Yeah.
at the time, I'm not in the best shape as I was when I used to, like even last year. But
Mhm.
like when I first started training and stuff, yeah, I was riding a couple 100 miles a week, trail jog. I would do trail marathons with just me and my friends, just go run 25 or 30 miles on the trails. I remember, riding like that, going down the Dockweiler for the day, or then the next day riding. But when I was, but the thing is even it's just being outdoors, like when it's hot.
Right.
My experience was my first day I was set to do a mountain solo. I didn't train for a while, so I did a tandem with my instructor, and it's let's do a tandem just to kind of get the feel for high altitude,
Mhm.
and then we'll go up and wait till later in the day, glass off, and I'll fly. I met him at 7 o'clock in the morning. We did a tandem early on. I watched other students do their first mountain solos to kind of get into it, and we were there all day from 8:30 in the morning on. By the time I got set up at the top of launch with my glider, it was already 6:30 at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got to launch, and I was like ready to go. I was feeling good. I'm not nervous at all. And it was once I got to launch, like all of a sudden, like my glider felt really heavy.
Yeah.
And then, we're talking like a straight path to fly. Everything seemed complicated. I'm like, and I just said, I think I'm just too tired to do this. And there were people behind me like, oh, dude, conditions are perfect, man. It's going to be great.
Mhm.
And I had to cancel it. And I felt bad. It took me like 2 minutes to think. I'm like, no, I could do it. No. It's only like a 10-minute flight.
Yeah.
I'll snap out of it as soon as I launch,
Yeah.
but and I went back to launch again, and the glider was heavy, and I just couldn't get it balanced. And we're talking like in Santa Barbara, launch an eliminator, you're not launching in wind. Like
Yeah.
there's it's a couple mile an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, man, what's so hard about this? And I'm like, I just got to call it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until afterwards where a couple of old timers said, you made a good call. They're like, we were out there. You were out there all day. Like, if you're not feeling it, there's no crime in saying, what, just you'll fly another day. And that fatigue, like I got home, I was wiped.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything, do a tandem
Well,
flight and watch.
And the thing is, though, is like, it seems like it's a short flight, but the thing that requires the most attention is probably the last 20 to 30 seconds of flying, maybe the last minute of flying, and certainly the last 4 or 5 seconds. And that's where almost all the injuries happen, is the last 4 or 5 seconds of flight, right? So it means that your attention has to be like at a fine point at that moment. So and like I just talked about, like how the psychological reaction to seeing somebody realize that like they may have a potential danger, or just having something unfamiliar come at them, the look in their eyes all took to destroy my concentration, right?
Yeah. And that's what I kept on thinking was, what, I could probably have enough strength to launch and control my glider and get to launch, but what if,
Yeah,
I
you have
hit
to land. Landings are
just some
mandatory.
lift or something. Yeah. Yeah. Or what if something out of the ordinary happens and I need to think fast? I'm not going to be. And my instructor really gave me a good, saying, like, on the drive down, I felt bad. Like I was like apologizing, and he's laughing. He's like, don't feel bad, dude. He's like, because you're flying off a mountain. He's like, that's nothing to joke about, he's like, but he said, you're better off being on the ground, wishing you're up in the air, than being up in the air, praying that you're back on the ground.
Yeah. Having been in that situation, I can tell you for a fact that is the truth, right, Bailey?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So Max, it is a delicate thing. And the thing is I actually feel like airplanes, the airplane flying community has a little bit better grasp on this, because what happens is when you're a new pilot, your instructor sets hard limits. So let me go get my logbook and I'll read you what my actual limits were. Hang on one second.
So how long have you guys been flying, Bailey and Tim?
Coming up on 3 years now. So
And
story.
Bailey, I saw you. I was at Andy Jackson when I saw you were flying on a Sunday, and you landed and you were talking to another guy, and I meant to run over. I didn't realize it was you. I heard you talking, and I'm like, wait. Afterwards, I'm like, I think I remember that guy. But yeah, so I think you had your Falcon, I believe.
I was meeting everybody that weekend. Sunday was my worst flight too, so I'm sorry you saw me that day and not Saturday.
Oh no, it was fine. But yeah, Max,
Okay.
I'm still pretty new. Even though I started a while back, but when I started taking lessons, I was kind of I really had no plan to even fly. I just wanted to learn something, and I kind of took sporadic lessons. So it took me a while to get my ratings, but I only have about just a little under 2 hours of mountain flying.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. So my 90-day solo endorsement says, limitations: 0 knots tailwind with a total wind of 5 knots or more, max 7 knots crosswind, max 15 knots total wind, min ceiling 3,000 feet, visibility 10 for non-local flights, and min ceiling 1,500 and visibility 3 for touch and goes. Okay, so basically, if the ceiling is at let's say 1,500 feet and the visibility is at 3 miles, can I do solo touch and goes at the local airport? No, I can't. Okay.
I think I heard 3,000 feet clouds.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I got to tell you, 3 mile visibility, 1,500 feet clouds, like that's flying, and that's really stressful, actually, for me personally. So what happens is that they set your hard requirements, and your hard requirements sort of, you expand them as your capability expands. But in hang gliding, it's like I don't feel like everybody has a good grasp on setting consistent results with personal limitations. So I think maybe we should probably like sort of get together as a group and sort of talk about that, and like maybe put together some guidelines for people for limitations. But Max, to your point of fatigue, like, look, nobody can judge that for yourself, but I got to tell you, like, you know yourself better than anyone. And so if you start to feel like you're starting to slow down, right, like something's not going right, or like you're having trouble keeping up, like it's better to go with that. I always like to paraphrase a infamous dictator in that I say, I'm a hero on the ground and I'm a coward in the air, right? Because unlike say Tim, I've actually been caught in this situation where I've been in the air and wanting to be on the ground, like desperately. Okay, like to the point where I'm pulling 2.5 G 70 degree bank turns, trying to spiral down and not making any headway. Right, like literally being repelled from the ground as if there was a magnet. Right. So hard limits, like if you want to, well, that's what the Observer Corps and Clark's on here as well, but that's what we're here to help you with, right? To help you develop the limits. But in terms of like what your personal limitations are, that's like, the 8 hours is a hard limit, but most people need more than that after doing a bender at night, right? So that's something that you have to judge for yourself. The fatigue you have to judge for yourself, and your cognitive performance you have to judge for yourself. And you're right, it's not that easy to figure that stuff out. But especially, I think for those of us who are over 30, that's easy. That's easier, I should say, right? Especially if you're over 40, it's even easier, right? The big problems are the young ones. Like if you're 18 or 19 years old, like we all know that, like, I mean, I remember as a young airman, I was like invincible. I used to go to work on Monday and work straight till Wednesday, 72 hours straight without sleeping, right? And be well enough that I could do like software coding, right? But like for me right now, if I miss 8 hours of sleep, I'm going to be pretty much non-functional. So for fatigue, that's on the ground. Fatigue on the ground, it's not that big a deal to figure that out, right? Because you kind of know yourself walking around on planet Earth. In the air, it's a whole different gig. So Bailey kind of the reason why I said he painted himself into a corner is because when you try and do so many things at once, what happens is that you think of it as every little new thing is taking a big bite of your cognitive ability, because you're having to use conscious effort to make it happen, right? So you have too many of those on top of that, then you have anything that unexpected that comes on top, that comes as a result of all that, like the chances of you really successfully navigating that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So
well, and what's it called in flying where you have the for mistakes to happen, they have to like line. You've got to.
It's
like,
called the Swiss
line up.
cheese slices.
Right. You've
So
got.
if you section Swiss cheese, you have a situation where all the holes line up, and that's how the accident happens.
Right. Exactly.
And so anything that happens to break that chain, any one thing in that chain can prevent the accident from happening. So like Bailey's talking about only trying one thing at a time, right? Only one thing new at a time. So if you're flying a new site, you want to be flying gear you know really well, right? If you're going to try new gear, you better be flying a site that you really know well.
Right.
So it's like you don't try to do too many things at once, right? And so in that sense, like my first flight back was old Dunlap. I knew the area, right? But it's a new launch, it's a new landing. That probably wasn't a smart thing to do looking back on it, but it was well within my capability, right? But like if I was going to step back and take it another look at it, I probably should have picked a site that I knew well, even better than Dunlap. So probably 11 would have been a good choice for a first flight back. Everything went fine, but it's like in terms of like just a personal policy, that probably would have been a better choice.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Anybody else have any other questions or stories? I see who's 2085, who's calling in on the phone.
And you are on mute in case you can't tell on the phone.
Yeah. 408-427-2085. Hello.
That's me, Takeos, Jimbo.
Oh, hey. Good to hear from you.
Nice conversation.
Yeah. Where did Clark go? Did Clark drop out? He did.
He was off a while ago, yeah.
Okay. Okay. If no one else has any questions, we can kind of close this out, but that gives me some good ideas. Oh, so I'm going to solicit everybody. I want you to come up with ideas for speakers and ideas for topics. If there's a topic that you can speak on or would like to speak on, I'm more than happy to have you, right? And it doesn't have to be by yourself. It can be a panel discussion like we're having right now.
And I don't have all the slides on mine done, but do you want to just put it on the schedule and I'll suffer through having an actual deadline?
Yeah, let me see. So I think next week I'm good. The week after I may be busy. So let's call it, well, when do you think you can be ready? You think you'll be ready next week, or you think you'll be ready in a couple of weeks? First week of July?
Yeah, no, next week should be doable.
Okay, so you want to do next week? Okay, so
yeah,
let's call it, let's put the spear in the sand for the 16th. Is that cool with you?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, 16th we'll do what? Is it the flying with firefighting aircraft? Or are you going to do another one?
No, flying around fire aviation.
Okay, fire aviation. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll put that the spear in the sand. Okay, thanks for joining, everybody, and have a good evening.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you.